This lecture will cover several aspects of socio-emotional development in middle adulthood. Erikson's seventh stage is generativity versus stagnation. And Erikson said that this occurred in our 40s and our 50s, which corresponds to the beginning part of middle adulthood. Now, Erikson said that our developmental task for this stage was generativity, to achieve a sense of immortality by leaving something positive, a positive legacy to the next generation. All right, so really to be remembered in a positive way by the younger generation after we have died. And the risk, if we don't achieve that task, is stagnation or self-absorption, a sense that we've done nothing for the next generation, that no one will remember us when we're gone. And so our goal is to really be looking at what are ways that we can leave a positive impact for people younger than us. So what are the ways that we can become generative? Erikson believed it was actually more difficult to achieve generativity if you weren't a parent, because he said that most people are going to, and that's one of their primary ways of being generative. Now, we can be generative if we are a biological parent, so that's biological generativity. We can also be generative through parental generativity, which we might be parenting or serving in a parental role by nurturing and caring for children who are not biologically ours. We can also achieve generativity through work generativity. Especially in midlife, we are going to be more likely to be in supervisory or managerial or training roles in our jobs. And by the time we get to midlife, we've often developed expertise and skills and knowledge that we can pass on to people who are newer in the workforce. And so in that way, we can make this very positive impact and help them become better at their jobs, maybe even pass on knowledge that helps them get promoted faster and be more successful than even what we experienced if we didn't have that same type of mentorship. The third way is cultural generativity. Through cultural generativity, we're really doing something positive and leaving a positive impact that will affect our culture in a broader sense. So this is going to be a more difficult way of being generative because it requires some type of big product, right? So it could be that you write a book that many people read that changes your culture. Could be that you're an architect and you build this amazing building or provide the plans to build this amazing building that is really impactful for the culture. Could be that you help start a social movement, get a law passed, right? So sometimes it's related to the work that you get paid to do, and sometimes it's something related to what you're doing in your free time that's just important to you. When we talk about midlife, this is often synonymous in people's minds with midlife crisis, right? So a lot of times that's one of the reasons why people are fearful of getting to midlife is because they worry, oh, I don't want to have a midlife crisis. But do most people have a midlife crisis? What even is a midlife crisis? A midlife crisis is a period of unusually high anxiety, radical re-examination of many aspects of your life, and making sudden transformations and changes. The good news is that no, most people do not have midlife crises. The research shows us that it's only a fairly small percent of people who are experiencing a true midlife crisis, and most people are experiencing more of a midlife consciousness or questioning, but not a crisis. Remember, we talked previously about midlife being a time where we're reflecting on the past and thinking ahead towards the future and deciding what changes we may want to make. So this is really going to be more common, is that we may want to make small tweaks and adjustments to some areas of our lives, but we're probably not going to have this big crisis and feel like everything is going wrong with our life and we want to change so many different aspects. But it's important for us to know when midlife crises do occur, what are the risk factors? What are the patterns that we're seeing? what we see is that individuals who are at risk for having a midlife crisis have a pattern of not dealing well with transitions in childhood, adolescence, young adulthood. They also have ineffective coping strategies for dealing with major non-normative life events. So if something happens that they weren't expecting to happen, they don't have good coping skills. Another factor that may go along with that or may be separate is we might have situations where individuals in early adulthood were severely limited in their ability to really make their own choices and fulfill their personal needs and goals. Perhaps it was due to family pressure or an income situation where they were really limited in their ability to pursue the goals that they had for themselves personally and be able to, have that period of exploration and decide what they thought would be a good pattern for their life. And so they might get to midlife and feel like, I need to reevaluate everything. I need to make all of these changes. Now, this term social roles means expected behaviors and attitudes that are associated with a social position. All of us have multiple social roles. So all of you in this class are students, all of you are children, many of you are siblings, many of you are employees or spouses, all of you are friends. These are all social roles. Sometimes we can have a role conflict. This is when we have the role expectations of two or more roles are either contradictory or incompatible for a long or short period of time. So take, for example, our two social roles of being a student and being an employee. Your employer might say, I need you to work overtime this whole week. We're really going to have to put in a lot of extra hours, and I just really need you to be dedicated to the job right now. And you might say, oh, but I have all these classes that I need to be studying for. I don't have extra time to be devoting to work right now. So in that case, your two roles of a student and an employee are in role conflict. Sometimes we have just one role that feels like too much. That would be role strain, right? So the difficulties of a person has in carrying out the multiple responsibilities attached to one role. This can be a mismatch between a person's ability and the demands of a role. And it often happens when we begin a new role, such as becoming a brand new parent. It can feel overwhelming and you can feel like you're not doing well. But as we go along, even though all those responsibilities stay the same, we might have less role strain because we've gotten more used to them and we've gotten a little bit more skilled. Let's jump back to early adulthood or young adulthood for a moment and look at some of the role transitions that happen to us in young adulthood. We often are leaving home and becoming independent. We're becoming a worker or a full-time worker, becoming a spouse or committed partner, perhaps becoming a parent. We're taking on a lot of new roles, and this can lead to a high chance of role conflict and role strain. And so young adulthood is perhaps one of the most stressful times in life. So if you are in early young adulthood and you feel like you are very stressed, we see that in the research. And because young adults have the highest daily stress compared to midlife adults or later adults. So just know it gets better. Now we jump to midlife. Social roles during midlife, we often are having some of those same roles. We're still a worker, we're still a spouse, we're still a parent. So since many of these roles aren't new, they may become less stressful, at least on average, right? We might have stressful days, but we might add some new roles. We might become a step parent, we might become a manager, we might start caring for an aging parent, and this might put us into a sandwich generation. Sandwich generation is just referring to individuals who are needing to care for their aging parents, who might have some health needs, and then also caring for their still dependent children. So you're kind of sandwiched between the older generation and the younger generation who both need your help. Another potential new role is empty nesters, right? Where we've launched our children, they're out in the world, they're adults now, and they're at college or they're on their own working. And so we call this the empty nest, but what the research shows us is that for most people, this is a fairly happy time. Most people aren't, those sad mama birds who are just so depressed that their children have flown away and the nest is empty. Most of the time there's a sense of a spacious nest, meaning that, they might miss their children, of course, but they tend to be quite happy and fulfilled and a sense of pride that their children have moved on and become independent adults. Another potential new role in midlife is a grandparent, which we'll talk about in a moment. One of the main reasons why social roles in midlife tend on average to be less stressful than young adulthood is because midlife adults have more resources to cope. They have more expertise, more practical problem solving, more life experience, and often more money. Grandparenthood. If you talk to grandparents, they often will say this is one of the best relationships of their life. About 75% of people over the age of 65 are grandparents, right? So 65 and older, that's late adulthood. But that means that most of these people became grandparents in middle adulthood. Many people are having their first grandchild on average in early to mid 40s. So some studies say 42 to 45, other studies say around 47, but somewhere in their 40s are often having their first grandchild. 75% of grandparents are having weekly contact with at least one of their grandchildren. And usually they say that this interaction is very enjoyable. For most grandparents, they say that it's a stress-free relationship. Now, we'll give you an example on the next slide of one type of grandparenting where they're not getting, they're not able to send the kids home and get rid of all the stress. So what are our different styles of grandparenting? Well, we have the formal grandparents, that little old grandma who has the candy in her pocket, and she has a very proper role. She's very interested in her grandchildren, but she does not get involved in parenting. Then she's more likely to be 65 and older. Then we have 65 and younger. They're the fun seeker. They're informal. They're playful. They're down on the ground with the grandkids, and they're looking for what are activities we can do that we both like that are mutually satisfying. Then we have the surrogate parent. Now these are not stress-free relationships because they are taking on a majority of the child care responsibilities. They might even be raising their grandkids. So they're doing a lot of the work. Then we have the reservoir of family wisdom. These are more likely to be grandfathers, and they're giving advice and knowledge and family history. It's a much more formal role. And then we have the distant grandparents. Now these could just be emotionally distant or they could be geographically distant. And you're probably only going to have contact with them around the holidays. So what determines your frequency of contact other than the style of grandparenting? Well, geographic proximity. The closer you are, the more likely you are on average to have a lot of contact. The age and the health. The healthier, younger grandparents might be more likely to have more contact. How many responsibilities? Are they still working? Might be harder for them to see you and pick you up from school. Number of sets of grandchildren. How many different sets of grandkids do they have to divide their time between? Lineage also makes a difference. We're more likely to have contact with maternal grandparents on average, your mom's parents, than paternal, your dad's side. Grandma or grandpa? Well, we're more likely to have contact with grandmothers. They're more likely to be volunteering for babysitting, volunteering to pick you up from school and take you places. They might drag grandpa along, so that plays a role in the marital status of grandpa. If grandpa is widowed, divorced, or separated from grandma, you're going to have half as much contact with him because he doesn't have grandma pulling him along saying, hey, come on, let's go. Also, the relationship status between the grandparents and the grandchildren is going to make a big difference. If they are close and they have a good relationship, you're more likely to see grandma and grandpa more often. If you have a special relationship between the grandparents and the grandchildren, then you're more likely to see them. So also the relationship between the grandparents and the grandchild makes a difference. Sometimes grandparents are going to have favorites, and in research they're more likely to say that they have favorites. So you might see that they might gravitate towards one child more than the other. Sometimes it's just that they feel connected. They feel like that grandchild is more like them or has some quality that they are really connected with. But overall, grandparents love the contact that they have with their grandkids.